Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I give you my word, I will look into this matter. Those were the words to residents and survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire from Sir Martin Moore-Bick, the retired judge who will oversee the inquiry into the disaster. He attended a meeting yesterday evening held by the Lancaster West Residents Association, where he denied he'd been appointed to do a hatchet job. Sir Martin has already faced calls to resign over fears from residents that his remit for the inquiry will be too narrow. Here's a clip from last night's meeting.
I can't do more than assure you that I know what it is to be impartial. I've been a judge for 20 years, and I give you my word that I will look into this matter to the very best of my ability and find the facts as I see them from the evidence. That's my job, that's my training, and that's what I intend to do. Now, if I can't satisfy you because you have some preconception about me as a person, that's up to you. But I'm telling you, well, I'm not getting personal. Yeah, but you don't respect me because you say the government has appointed me to do a hatchet job.
Not a hatchet job, you're going to do a Taylor report like for Hillsborough, which was very technical but didn't deal with the wider issues, and it took 30 years for people to be arrested.
This is why it's so important to get the terms of reference right and for you to tell me what you think it should cover.
We did, and then you dismissed them on TV.
I think you've misremembered what I said.
I'll find the clip.
Well, that was the meeting last night. At that meeting was Joe Delaney. He's a member of the Grenfell Action Group, and he joins us now. Well, it was a heated meeting. What's your thinking on it?
Well, I mean, as you saw there, I was giving Sir Martin Moore-Bick my opinion. I met him last week, and I felt that he came out and immediately spoke to the media and was quite dismissive of our calls for a wider inquiry than what he sees as it just being about, you know. We don't want this reduced to just being a mere debate about cladding, because the issues are far wider than that.
So, I mean, he's not said it will be just about cladding, has he? He's said that he's determined, and I'm quoting from him, I'm determined to establish the causes of the tragedy and ensure appropriate lessons are learned. To do this, the inquiry will need to examine all relevant circumstances leading up to and surrounding the fire at Grenfell Tower in order to understand its causes and prevent such a tragedy ever happening again. I want to hear from people directly affected by the fire and others involved to listen to their views on the shape of the inquiry's work and the questions we should be seeking to answer. With those words, he sounds open-minded in terms of the scope of the inquiry.
Well, I mean, in the Queen's speech, we were promised an open inquiry along those lines, and yet Sir Martin has said...
Oh, we've been put on hold. OK, we'll try to get off hold and go back to Joe Delaney. In fact, I think, there we go. Sorry, you went on hold momentarily, but you pick up where you were.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you know, then he, as I said, in the Queen's speech, we were promised a wide inquiry along those lines. And yet then he said that he'd been told privately that, you know, the inquiry was going to be a lot narrower. Why is he not willing to publish, say, all the correspondence he's had between the Prime Minister's office and himself concerning the inquiry? You know, why was he so dismissive of the reasonable concerns that people made in a lot smaller groups last week? If he'd have actually listened there, he wouldn't have faced such a, you know, such a sceptical crowd last night.
Yeah, he at that meeting last night, he said, I cannot do more than to assure you I know what it is to be impartial. I've been a judge for 20 years and I give you my word. I will look into this matter to the very best of my ability and find the facts as I see them from my evidence. That's my job. That's my training. That's what I intend to do. You still don't trust him?
It's not a case of trust. It's more a case of him saying one thing and then doing another. I mean, even in the meeting...
He is saying this. What about why not give him some time to see what he does?
Well, I've given him time to see what he does. He was in a meeting with me last week. He said that he'd taken on board everything we said, and then he went outside 3 hours later and spoke to the media and was very dismissive of all of residents' concerns. I understand he's not going to be able to please everyone. But, you know, the loose language that he used last week and also his choice of language last night doesn't elicit confidence. And frankly, this man is an advocate for, what, 50-odd years of his life. If he cannot sell a simple case, one that he actually believes in, then, you know, what faith should we have in him in general?
Well, I mean, he said his job is to be impartial, to try to get to the bottom of what has happened here, to listen to the facts, and he's absolutely open to, he wants to hear from residents as to what it is that residents want him to look at in terms of the remit of the inquiry. He can't... Oh, we've gone back on hold. We'll give it a moment in case it comes back as it did before. No. OK. We'll try to fix that.
Well, the head of the inquiry into the Grenfell Tower disaster was heckled as he met residents and survivors last night. Residents said they lack confidence in Sir Martin Moore-Bick after he tried to reassure them he would carry out the inquiry to the very best of his ability at a meeting in Kensington.
I mean, I can't do more than assure you that I know what it is to be impartial. I've been a judge for 20 years, and I give you my word that I will look into this matter to the very best of my ability and find the facts as I see them from the evidence. That's my job, that's my training, and that's what I intend to do. Now, if I can't satisfy you because you have some preconception about me as a person, that's up to you. But I'm telling you, well, I'm not getting personal. Yeah, but you don't respect me because you say the government has appointed me to do a hatchet job.
Not a hatchet job, you're going to do a Taylor report like for Hillsborough, which was very technical but didn't deal with the wider issues, and it took 30 years for people to be arrested.
This is why it's so important to get the terms of reference right and for you to tell me what you think it should cover.
We did, and then you dismissed them on TV.
I think you've misremembered what I said.
I'll find the clip.
Guys, we have got two ladies...
Well, our reporter Dan Whitehead has been following this story, so perhaps a response that we may have expected, but not the response that he would have wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was going to be expecting a frosty reception at this meeting. He's been under pressure for a number of weeks since being announced as the head of this public inquiry. What that meeting was all centred on was to work out the terms of reference. This was the letter which was given to residents there, the terms of reference of this public inquiry. The anger from residents is that they only have until 5 p.m. next Friday to submit just what they want from this inquiry, how far-reaching it should be. A lot of residents have told Sky News that they say that the people in charge of this inquiry are cashing in on the fact that they are tired, they're emotional, they're overwhelmed, and having just 7 days to think about, you know, what this inquiry should focus on exactly and how wide the scope should be simply isn't enough time. We heard from one of the gentlemen in that meeting there. That was Joe Delaney from the Grenfell Action Group. He spoke to Sky News about his thoughts about Sir Martin Moore-Bick's ability to run this inquiry.
For a man who spent 50 years in sort of advocacy and judiciary, he wasn't able to sell an argument very well to anyone, you know, and we don't really have that much faith in him now. I mean, the terms that were given in the Queen's speech were quite broad. He then quoted himself to he gave a piece to the Daily Mail saying, you know, he'd been told privately that the remit would be a lot narrower, so we're already sceptical.
A lot of anger, of course, is centred on the fact that these residents want police and criminal charges brought against people here. Martin Moore-Bick in the letter was keen to stress that that is something for the Metropolitan Police in their investigation. The public inquiry will not deal or bring any criminal charges against anyone. That is for the Met Police. All this, of course, comes as huge teams are still inside the tower here. Every day they are searching through 15.5 tons of rubble on every single floor. The visible remains, the human remains, were pulled out on Monday. There are still human remains in that building, and police warn that it could be the end of this year before they're all recovered.
OK, Dan, many thanks indeed for the updates.
The BBC has obtained footage of a meeting last night at which the judge leading the inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire was heckled by residents as Sir Martin Moore-Bick attempted to reassure locals that he would look into the matter to the very best of his ability. Residents said they still lacked confidence in him and his words of reassurance were not good enough. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports.
From the evidence.
In court, the judge is the boss, but not here.
Now, if I can't satisfy you because you have some preconception about me as a person, that's up to you. But I'm telling you...
This closed meeting was the second time Sir Martin Moore-Bick had met the people at the centre of the tragedy he's been asked to explain. He is still trying to win their confidence.
And I give you my word that I will look into this matter for the very best of my ability and find the facts as I see them from the evidence.
His officials said he faced no personal hostility, more a mistrust of the establishment he is perceived to represent.
Yeah, but you don't respect me because you say the government has appointed me to do a hatchet job.
Not a hatchet job, you're going to do a Taylor report like for Hillsborough, which was very technical but didn't deal with the wider issues, and it took 30 years for people to be arrested.
This is why it's so important to get the terms of reference right and for you to tell me what you think it should cover.
We did, and then you dismissed them on TV.
I think you've misremembered what I said.
I'll find the clip.
That clip was from a television interview last week in which Sir Martin was asked if he would consider wider social issues surrounding the fire as part of his inquiry.
I can fully understand why they would want that. Whether my inquiry is the right way in which to achieve that, I'm more doubtful.
Some have demanded more time to respond to the consultation on the inquiry's remit. Sources say the judge is not minded to change the date that will end, currently the 14th of July. The Prime Minister will have the final decision, it's hoped, by the 20th of July. He is still being criticised among some as not right for the job, but others are starting to say he should be allowed to get on with it. This community does not speak with a single voice.
Everybody's at different places, so you get some people feel this way, some people feel that way, because everyone's handling the trauma and the stress differently. So time is needed, but time is also of the essence.
Sir Martin's legal pedigree is not in doubt, but can this Cambridge-educated judge take a community with him? It's a question that's been asked before. After the murder of Stephen Lawrence in the 1990s, the government appointed Sir William Macpherson as inquiry chair, and he published a landmark report on racism despite his establishment background.
And in fact, of course, he turned out to be very good indeed. The crucial thing was that because he wasn't a lefty and in soft touch when it comes to racism, nobody could undermine his conclusions because he was too soft on the issues.
17 years later, the Grenfell inquiry is expected to begin hearing evidence in September. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Now, trust. There's not a lot of it around in a community which feels forgotten, abandoned and unheard. And last night there were heckles and jeers as the Grenfell inquiry chair, Sir Martin Moore-Bick, faced angry residents at a meeting in West London. There was disquiet over the inquiry's timescale and terms of reference, as Sir Martin insisted it had been very useful to hear local people's views. And it's hoped the first public hearings could be heard in early September. Camian Zeram has more.
Artist, poet and swimmer. Her family want her to be remembered simply as Sheila, the 18th person to have been formally identified as a victim of the Grenfell fire. She leaves behind 2 sons, 6 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren.
Good afternoon, Mr. Moore-Bick.
Last night, survivors and residents met the chair of the Grenfell inquiry and voiced their anger and mistrust.
You're going to do a Taylor report like for Hillsborough, which was very technical but didn't deal with the wider issues, and it took 30 years for people to be arrested.
This is why it's so important to get the terms of reference right and for you to tell me what you think it should cover.
What should the inquiry cover? Many are worried decisions are being made too quickly to fit in with Parliament going on summer recess. The meeting had barely started when this man walked out in disgust.
The government shouldn't be having a recess. They should be sorting this out.
There is so much to sort out. Sir Martin Moore-Bick has a lot of persuading to do.
I can't do more than assure you that I know what it is to be impartial. I've been a judge for 20 years, and I give you my word that I will look into this matter for the very best of my ability and find the facts as I see them from the evidence.
And many just want to get things moving.
My only concern about extending the deadline is that the work won't start but surely we should get the work started. It makes no sense to me to just have it on hold.
Nina Masro isn't sure if she'll ever be able to face moving back into her flat just a few yards from Grenfell Tower. But she told me today that meeting Sir Martin felt like progress.
Hopefully he'll take on board what we have to say, what our concerns are, that things won't be swept under the carpet, that documents won't suddenly disappear, whether it's the council's documents, whether it's the contractor's documents, that, you know, we're going to move forward and we'll get justice.
But faith in justice is in short order, and there's still confusion around the deadline for setting the terms of reference. Officially, submissions must be in by next Friday, though the inquiry team say there is some flexibility.
The survivors' and residents' anger and mistrust at authority at the inquiry itself is understandable for so many reasons. But the inquiry team needs the terms of reference, and it needs them quickly because it has to start working. It has to start reviewing evidence and looking at documents. And sources close to the inquiry say if they have to go back as far as 1974, when Grenfell Tower itself was built, then they will.
It's incremental. It's a tiny, tiny step in the massive scheme of this horror, but it's a step in the right direction.
Not everyone will agree.
Very useful meeting, thank you.
But last night's meeting would appear to represent progress for the chair of the inquiry too.
Well, I'm joined now by Melvyn Akins, a resident of the West Lancaster estate, and also by West London resident and volunteer Ms B, and former Lord Chancellor and QC, Lord Faulkner. Melvyn Akins, I mean, when the judge said, you know, he knows how to be impartial, he's going to look for the facts, did that reassure you at all?
It's offered some reassurance, but not total reassurance. There's some debate about what the terms of reference should include, and he said himself that some of those things would be difficult to maybe include in the terms of reference, such as social housing policy as an overarching policy or feature. But he did say he thought that it would be a lot more in depth than people thought initially.
So that reassured you?
I think so, but I think he's got a lot more work to do in terms of how he delivers it.
Well, Ms B, that delivery, I mean, he got quite a rough reception, didn't he?
Yeah, he didn't have an easy ride, but I think it goes with the territory. At the end of the day, it's hard to find someone in that position who can erude empathy, and you know, the people are looking for someone that is caring and that is warm, and that can actually understand just how deep the need is, and he just doesn't seem to convey that. You know, that's not a fault of his own, it's just, for all his background, it's just not, the two just don't go together.
Lord Faulkner, that is the problem, isn't it? I mean, David Lammy got a bit of a hard time when he said that Sir Martin Morbick, the judge, was a white, upper-middle-class man, but it's true, isn't it? And that is a problem, isn't it, in this context?
Well, it's certainly true. He's how you've described him. The question is, can he do the job in a way that gains confidence for a community that your reporter rightly says is very, very untrusting? I mean, I think he can only prove himself by what he does, and that means he's got to keep communicating with the residents and with the community that live there, with a view to gaining their trust, and that trust is not going to come overnight.
But is he communicating?
He said that he would, and he actually invited us to offer to give statements to the police if we felt that they were pertinent to the inquiry, and he offered other bits of information that we could follow up on in order to participate in the public inquiry. Now, whether that actually becomes part of the evidence that he looks at overall remains to be seen, but he did offer advice on ways we could actually contribute to the public inquiry.
Ms B, I mean, when it comes to the scope, you yourself escaped from a fire on an estate in Southall, didn't you?
Yeah, many years ago.
I mean, would you like it to be broad enough to take in these wider questions on the state of social housing, political neglect?
Yeah, I can't understand why so many fires seem to be happening at the scale they're happening within social housing, and why companies and councils feel it's okay to give people second-rate fireproofing, which is the reason why these fires are being expedited as quickly as they are, and the scale of the terror of it. It really needs to be readdressed. It's almost as if, because you live in social housing, you're treated as a second-class citizen. These people, like many others, go to work, pay their taxes. Not all of them were on benefits, and even if they were, they're still human beings, and they deserve a right to be safe.
And that's a problem, isn't it? There's just a gulf between the establishment and the people living in tower blocks like Grenfell. The inquiry doesn't look like it's going to address that.
Well, I see no reason at all why the society should not address the question that's just been posed.
Society or the inquiry?
The inquiry, sorry. I meant the inquiry. Is it because social tenants were treated as second-class citizens that the fire occurred in Grenfell Tower? That is an issue that the inquiry can address. There's a precedent in relation to inquiries addressing big social issues. Sir William Macpherson had to address the issue, was the investigation of Stephen Lawrence's death by the police a result of racism? And he did address that big issue, just as the issue which you've accurately framed, because that's what so many people think. It's because people couldn't care less about social housing that the tragedy occurred. Now, that is the question that the community want to address. I cannot believe it cannot be included in the terms of reference.
I mean, Ms B, you were impassioned. You took your concerns into Parliament, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Do you feel that MPs now have got the message?
Well, if they haven't, I'm quite happy to give them another message and set them straight, because you can only imagine the horror, but when you actually smell the horror and see the survivors of that horror, it more than brings it home. And I even invited, or shouted out even, that David Lammy and Diane Abbott not just sit in the Houses of Commons, but come down, see the people, see that tower for itself. Even as you're approaching, it's just a foreboding presence, and you just feel the greyness. The first week after, walking that way after helping with the volunteering, there was no eye contact on that street for ages. You know, people liken these types of conditions to being in a war-torn country. That's a war-torn community. That building looks like it's been through the wars, much less the people that, God forbid, didn't escape and those people that did.
Melvin Akins, do you feel that politicians are actually sort of getting a bit of the message now?
No, not at all. I believe there's a lot of grandstanding about what will be done and what should be done, but that's not filtering through to the people that need to feel the support of those people.
I think that the politicians, the judges, the media, they're all absolutely on trial in relation to this. And the thing that will really matter is what results do we produce. Does the media change its attitude? Does the judge produce a report that the residents have confidence in? Do the politicians do anything? Because nothing you say in the face of what's happened will be believed by anybody until things change.
Well, the anger and grief is still so raw around Grenfell. Do you have any sympathy with the Minister, Greg Hands, who suggested that the Notting Hill Carnival should not take place amidst this national tragedy, should not take place there?
Well, if you're familiar with Notting Hill Carnival and the noise and the volume of people, it was feared that the tower was going to come down of its own accord. I can only say...
Because of the vibrations?
Because of the vibrations. Well, it moved by 5 millimetres earlier this week, and I was concerned for residents and people that were close to it. And I'm not saying that Carnival should be stopped, because I know there's many people that don't want to see Carnival in that area anyway. What I'm saying is, if we are having a Carnival this year, that we actually have a Carnival of silence, that we still have our Carnival costumes, but all of that vibrancy, I honestly don't know. I did interview someone for Facebook Live, and it was the weekend of Father's Day, and I know Facebook has removed all of my posts, so I can't share that with you. But he explained the situation where it was Father's Day. He had managed to get someone out of that fire, and that people were still barbecuing and enjoying their Father's Day while there was a very deeply traumatised community around, and he couldn't fathom how they could possibly do that. And yes, life goes on, and yes, people do come regularly to Notting Hill Carnival, but we have to take into account what's just happened. I mean, and not just the fire, but the whole way the council have almost abandoned these people. Silence is an answer too. And these people, they've had no for the days that I've been there, I haven't seen one council official. I haven't had any overall official to say, if you're on floor 10, report here. Where do you go for housing advice? These people have just been abandoned and neglected at the worst time of a disaster.
I'm sorry, we could go on talking for hours, but thank you very much, Ms B, Melvin Akins and Lord Faulkner. Thank you very much for joining me.
So much is known about the fire at Grenfell Tower, and yet still so little. Inquiries will undoubtedly focus on the issues now familiar, the cause of the fire and the cladding which spread it, the building regulations and inspection regime, the concerns of the tenants and the inadequate response of the Kensington and Chelsea Council afterwards. But there's another important area where the lessons are being examined. It's how London Fire Brigade fought the fire. It was a night of unquestioned bravery of individuals who risked everything to rescue those inside and control the flames. But were they equipped to deal with a disaster of that magnitude unfolding in front of them? Could it have been doused more successfully, for example, if an aerial platform had been summoned earlier? Well, Newsnight has uncovered evidence of a series of failings on that night that no firefighters could have overcome. John Sweeney reports, and a warning, there is quite a bit of bad language in this piece.
Inside the tower, it was like a war zone. Dark heat, pitch black, toxic smoke. But in the worst possible circumstances, London's firefighters did their best.
I saw firefighters who I know are extremely fit, marathon runners, completely fucked, throwing up.
The fire floors we went in were helmet-meltingly hot.
I stood up on the 10th floor to smash a door in and instantly felt the heat on my head and shoulders. When I got down and removed my tunic, my shoulders were burnt.
Firefighters have been banned from speaking to the media, but Newsnight has gathered anonymous first-hand accounts from those fighting the fire through an intermediary. We've also obtained the incident mobilisation list, the document which details when every London Fire Brigade appliance was sent and when it arrived. We pieced together a picture of the battle to fight the Grenfell fire and identified a series of failings that made a desperate task even tougher. 5 minutes to 1, 2 fire engines or pumps, call signs G272 and G271 from G27, that's North Kensington Fire Station, get the call out. They're on scene in 4 minutes. 2 more fire engines from Kensington and Hammersmith arrive shortly after. They've been called to a fridge fire on the 4th floor. What the firefighters on the inside couldn't see was what was happening on the outside. The firefighters went to the fire on the 4th floor and they were pretty confident they'd got on top of it. And then something bad happens, something weird on their radios. They're hearing it's a 4-pump fire, that means there's 4 fire engines. Then it's a 10-pump fire, that's bad. Then it's a 20-pump fire, that's a catastrophe. And they don't get it because they're on top of the fire. And then they realise the fire is growing on the outside.
Grenfell Tower on fire, fire brigade, everything. Look. Wow, look.
At 1:15, 5 more appliances are called out from Paddington and Hammersmith.
Fire spreading up.
This footage, shot on a mobile phone, shows the fire hit the cladding and rage up the side of the tower. Firefighters try to tackle the blaze from the ground. 1:19. 24 minutes after the first crew is dispatched, the first tall ladder, or aerial, is assigned to the fire. 1:19. 24 minutes after the first crew is dispatched, the first high ladder, or aerial, call sign A213, is assigned to the fire from Paddington. It arrives at 1:32 a.m. If anything could have stopped the fire spreading to the outside, it might have been a high ladder and pump. So why weren't they sent immediately?
The PDA is the predetermined attendance. That's what the Fire and Rescue Service plans for different locations if there is a call. Aerial appliances were not on the original PDA, so in this case there was some half hour or so before the aerial appliance arrived. Whether that would have made a difference is something that needs to be looked at. I have spoken to aerial appliance operators in London who drive and operate those appliances and who attended that incident, who think that having that on the first attendance might have made a difference, because it allows you to operate a very powerful water tower from outside the building onto the building.
Are you okay?
By the time the high ladder arrived, it was too late. The London Fire Brigade told Newsnight that the PDA has been changed after Grenfell, so that an aerial appliance and an extra fire engine will now attend fires in high-rise buildings. Inside, firefighters were battling the worst fire in Britain since the Second World War. The stairwells and tower blocks are supposed to be smoke-free. In Grenfell, the stairwell was yet another hazard.
There was seriously heavy smoke-logged floors between 3 and 14 early doors. Couldn't see a thing.
The stairwells were smoke-logged and full of casualties.
Fighting a fire with toxic smoke, some of the Grenfell fire retardant was based on cyanide, is like deep-sea diving. The firefighters had 23 stories to climb, but they had to keep enough air to get back down again. Very soon, far too soon, they were running out of air.
A firefighter from North Kent brought a casualty down from the 21st, and the guy was unconscious by the 19th. The firefighter dragged him down to the 10th and ran out of air. He took his mask off and pegged it down. He collapsed as he came out.
Crews were working on the stairs without breathing apparatus. They were sorting water and acting as runners.
We took our masks off to put them on people and saw fuckloads of other people doing the same.
More than an hour after the first crews were sent, the mobilisation list shows the fire chiefs on the ground called in every single extended breathing set in London, from places like Wandsworth, Islington and Tower Hamlets.
In terms of the compressed air breathing apparatus, clearly more would have been helpful. Again, we have to say this was an unprecedented fire. So what became clear in this incident is that the extended duration sets were what was increasingly required, and more of those clearly would have helped. I think that raises questions about whether there should be a review of that.
On the night of the fire, we're told, there was a big problem with water pressure. And if you're a firefighter tackling an inferno, that's not good.
There was total chaos beyond entry control. The fire floors we went in were helmet-meltingly hot, and we only went in the lobbies initially. Later, when we were clearing flats, it was a case of a quick look in and close the doors because the water pressure wasn't up to the firefighting.
Newsnight understands that the fire brigade asked Thames Water to boost the pressure. Even after that, we're told, the problems with water pressure continued. When approached by Newsnight, Thames Water would not comment directly on whether they were asked by the fire service to boost pressure, but they did issue this statement.
We've been supporting the emergency services response in every way possible. Any suggestion there was low pressure or that Thames Water did not supply enough water to fire services during this appalling tragedy is categorically false.
In thick smoke, in raging heat, something else went wrong too. Firefighters complained their radio communications weren't working properly. They weren't punching through 10 stories or more of concrete, and there was so much traffic on the airwaves they couldn't understand what was being said. Some of them weren't just fighting blind, they were fighting deaf too.
The comms were so overcrowded I turned mine off. We couldn't get priority messages away and gave up trying. We were asked to withdraw several times, but just ignored it because we were amongst it at that point.
There's always been a problem in ship firefighters and high-rise buildings that anything above a certain amount of floors, you have a problem with, and we've always had a problem. When I was in the brigade, we always had a problem with the UHF radios, or handheld radios, and the breathing apparatus radios. And I can imagine the amount of BA teams that have been put in there. Each team would have been given its own call sign, like Zulu 1 or Zulu 2, etc. And then you would have had 1 or 2 breathing apparatus control officers trying to manage all of the messaging backwards and forwards.
The firefighters spoke of the fire as a war zone, of ways of attack and retreat. By 4:30, crews from every part of London, Sutton, Ealing, Barking, Lewisham have been mobilised. The scale of the response is unprecedented. The highest fire service aerial platform in Britain is not in London but in Surrey. It arrived hours after the fire was out of control. So would a high platform have helped? The machine is at full stretch here. We're at 61 metres high, only a few metres off the full height of Grenfell Tower. The question is, had one of these machines or something like it been available from the get-go on that terrible night, would the story of the tragedy of Grenfell Fire ended quite differently? The London Fire Brigade told Newsnight the Commissioner has made her intention to fully review the Brigade's resources and seek funding for any additional requirements. The firefighters had been trained to fight the wrong kind of tower block fire, and at the heart of this was the advice to residents to stay put until rescued. The controversy over stay put will continue to rage, but with Grenfell Fire's death toll as high as it is, the policy must surely be reviewed. One of the last residents to be rescued from Grenfell was at 6:30 in the morning. More than 200 people survived, but more than 80 people didn't. It's a truth worth retelling that firefighters rushed into harm's way that terrible night. They were heroes, no question. But was their kit up to scratch, and did it arrive in a timely fashion? We won't know the full answers until the public inquiry, but already it's safe to say that those in charge of keeping the capital safe from fire have serious questions to answer. There were failures, but London's Dark Monument also stands testament to extraordinary bravery against the odds too.
John Sweeney there, who compiled that report with producer James Clayton. Well, of course, the firefighters had not encountered anything as serious as Grenfell, and it behaved in ways they didn't predict. Whatever plans you have, suddenly they're confronted with that kind of reality, and they go to naught. Let's talk through some of the points raised in that film with Ronnie King. He was Chief Fire Officer at Mid and West Wales Fire and Rescue Service for 20 years. He also works in London and Yorkshire, and also serves as an advisor to MPs on the all-party parliamentary group on fire safety, and he joins us from Swansea. A very good evening to you. Just a sort of quick initial reaction to what we've heard there and these firefighters' accounts of what they confronted on that night.
Yes, I think we have to say that what firefighters have said is obviously very concerning, and it always occurs after a major incident. This is very much a major incident. London Fire Brigade's been in business since, well, 150 years now. I'm sure that every incident develops new procedures, new policies, and their policies that currently exist are because they're predicated on the fact that a building like Grenfell Tower is compliant with the building regulations. And if this was compliant with the building regulations, then certainly there is something seriously wrong with the regulations. If it wasn't compliant, then there's something seriously wrong with the procedures.
Let's just take a look at one or two of the more specific things. So an aerial platform, is it your view on what you've seen that if a platform had, particularly a high one, had been available much earlier, that fire could have been controlled and doused out, even with all the cladding and all the issues we know about?
I represented the families of the deceased at Lacanau House during the inquest, and I did recommend to the QC leading that investigation that London Fire Brigade may wish to review its aerial policy on the basis that the platforms there were within yards of the actual rescue of people from the balcony and from the flats affected, and but just didn't quite make it. They just didn't quite get to that point.
And is it your view that you should send out an aerial, send out a high ladder straight away if you know the fire is in a building that's tall?
The initial predetermined attendance for many fire brigades are that wherever there's a special risk, they automatically send a vehicle, a special appliance like an aerial platform, to that special risk. I hear, and I'm not privy to to the investigation will of course, the criminal investigation, and of course the inquiry, the public inquiry, will get to the bottom of what policies were in place. But if we work on the assumption that the policy was not to send an aerial platform to this, it would have been on the basis that they've evaluated its usage over a period, and how many times does it get to work, and how many times does it get called out and returned, not used. And I'm sure that that had something to do with it, but again, until we see the inquiry and the results.
I mean, obviously there were problems with breathing equipment, particularly the more enduring breathing equipment. One interpretation of what happened is they just didn't really know how bad this fire was going to turn out to be because it ripped up the side of the building. The other is that they just are under-equipped, maybe because they haven't been spending cuts have meant they haven't spent or invested enough in equipment. I mean, which of those two interpretations would come closer to your view on what you've seen so far?
No, London Fire Brigade are one of the best equipped, if not the best equipped in the country, and I wouldn't want to criticise any policy of London Fire Brigade. Those firefighters did a marvellous job with the equipment they had. Yes, of course, we are hearing from your story that some of the firefighters have made claims, and those claims will be thoroughly investigated. But clearly you can't accept that they have rescue appliances that carry this additional breathing apparatus, extended duration sets. And of course, they are strategically placed, and all of them were used. So all of the available extended duration sets in London were mobilised to this incident and used, as they were at Lakenall House.
Is the problem ultimately that they didn't have a plan B? They knew what sort of fire they could cope with in a tall building. It was one where the fire would be contained in 1 or 2 apartments and they would get everybody out after putting it out. Is the problem they just didn't imagine you could have a tall building that didn't meet building regulations, or that the building regulations were wrong, and so you could have a fire like this? They just didn't have it in their mindset that it could be that bad.
I think the timing of the fire in the early hours, you heard about the water pressure being low. Water companies do reduce pressures in the evening and later, because it will save on leaks to their mains. I'm not saying that Thames Water did that, but when the fire brigade asks for increases in pressures, then they come. Those pressures are increased, and we will find out if that was the case or not. I'm sure this will come out in the public inquiry. Whether firefighters themselves were justified and ought to have anticipated a contingency plan for such an event, I think that's very difficult. Not many people, if any, in this country have seen a fire in a built block of flats full of people at that time in the morning asleep, and have seen the consequences of that. I don't think anybody could have contingency planned for that, because our buildings should be safe. Our buildings should be safe in the first place. All the firefighting operations are predicated on firefighters fighting the building from inside, not outside. Obviously, it's excellent to be able to have an aerial platform ready on strategically placed for such an event, but in reality, they would be there standing idle for long periods.
Ronnie King, thank you very much indeed, and we appreciate it. It's much easier in hindsight to make all these observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've been